I want to tell you about a single disease that makes COVID look like a Fisher-Price toy, by killing a third of the people in Europe, and how the Church responded. This is the tale of the Black Death, a devastating pandemic that swept through Europe in the 14th century. Originating in Asia, this deadly plague traveled along trade routes, infiltrating towns and cities, leaving a trail of despair in its wake. From here, it hitched a ride with merchants and soldiers, spreading across the Mediterranean and into the heart of Europe. The Church, a cornerstone of medieval society, found itself grappling with the enormity of the plague. As the death toll rose, the clergy faced the Herculean task of providing comfort to the living, while burying the dead, often falling victim to the disease themselves. Amidst the turmoil and fear, the Church's authority was tested, as they struggled to provide answers and solace to a populace that looked upon them for spiritual guidance. The speed at which the plague spread was terrifying. Trade routes, once the lifeblood of Europe's economy, became highways of death. Armies marching to conquer new lands unwittingly carried the disease into untouched regions. The symptoms of the plague were horrific: fevers, chills, and painful swellings, or buboes, from which the disease derived its name. The sight of these symptoms was enough to send people into panic. As the disease spread, so did fear. Rumors of a great pestilence circulated, instilling terror in the hearts of the populace. The Black Death was not just a disease, it was a spectre of doom, a sign of the end times. Doctors, armed with limited knowledge and even more limited tools, were powerless to stop the plague. The Church, too, was at a loss. Priests and monks, often the first to tend to the sick, were among the first to fall victim to the disease. Even spreading out did nothing. Tales tell of pilgrims leaving their town to head off into the wilderness, only to be consumed later by the same plague they fled. The Black Death was on the rise, and Europe was on the brink of an unprecedented catastrophe. The Black Death, a sweeping wave of mortality, brought with it a sense of doom and despair. The Church, traditionally a beacon of hope and faith, was forced to navigate these treacherous waters, grappling with its role amidst the chaos. As the plague ravaged towns and cities, the Church stepped up its efforts, performing mass confessions, last rites, and burials. Clergy members, despite the risk of contracting the disease themselves, offered solace to the dying and the bereaved. Yet, the sheer scale of the devastation often outpaced their ability to provide these services. Graveyards filled to capacity, and in some places, bodies were simply piled into mass graves, a grim testament to the virulence of the plague. But the Church's trials did not end there. Alongside the physical threat of the Black Death came a spiritual challenge. The Flagellants, a group of religious zealots, began to gain traction. The Flagellants were not a typical religious order. They were laymen, ordinary people driven to extraordinary measures by fear and desperation. Their practices were extreme, even by the standards of the day. They believed the plague was divine punishment for humanity's sins and sought to atone through acts of extreme penitence. Clad in white robes marked with a red cross, they would march from town to town, performing public displays of self-punishment. Their rituals were brutal, flogging themselves until their backs were raw and bloody, a sight that both horrified and fascinated onlookers. Their beliefs were a potent mix of apocalyptic prophecy and religious fervor. They held that their penance would bring about God's mercy, ending the plague and restoring order to a world turned upside down. Their message resonated with many, and their ranks swelled with followers. Before I talk more about the Black Death and its morbid history, I wanted to tell you for just a minute about the tool I use to study these topics. I've used Logos Bible software for over a decade now, and I have the receipts to prove it. If you have little or even no background in church history or the Bible but are excited about learning, Logos can bring a whole level of structure to your study and time. I can say without a doubt, it has saved me thousands of hours of research. It is not just for church work either. If you're into classical studies, I would also recommend adding the Perseus Collection, which will give you over 1,100 books completely for free. Everything from Aristotle to Ovid to Xenophon. The Perseus Collection is free, and there are free additional resources every month. I've included a link below to a base package that can get you started. The Fundamentals package is designed to give you the base along with a few free books of your choice. I'll leave a link to the Perseus Collection as well, in case you're interested in getting that collection along with it. Those links are in the description near the top. And yes, I will receive a small affiliate commission that will barely scratch the amount I've gladly spent over the years. Now, let's discuss more about the plague. In the beginning, the Church showed a surprising degree of tolerance towards the Flagellants. After all, at a time when the clergy themselves were not immune to the plague's ravages, the Church was hard-pressed to provide spiritual guidance to a terrified populace. Here were the Flagellants, offering a tangible form of atonement, a beacon of hope in the darkest of times. But as the movement grew, so did the Church's unease. The Flagellants' public displays of penance were seen as a challenge to the Church's authority. Moreover, their apocalyptic prophecies and claims of divine inspiration were viewed as heresy. Eventually, the Church moved to suppress the Flagellants, condemning them as a dangerous cult. In the end, the Flagellants' radical approach to faith was both their strength and their downfall. Yet the damage was done. The Church, once unassailable in its authority, found its foundations shaken. The Black Death had cast a long, dark shadow over the faith of the people. Many began to question the Church's role, its practices, and most crucially, its capacity to protect them from such calamities. The once steadfast belief in the divine protection offered by the Church had been replaced by a rising tide of skepticism. The relentless onslaught of the plague, the sheer scale of the devastation, had left scars on the collective psyche. The Church's inability to provide a remedy, or even a plausible explanation for the catastrophe beyond the wrath of God at the sins of the people, only served to exacerbate the disillusionment. The aftermath of the Black Death also saw a shift in societal structures. The drastic reduction in population led to a scarcity of labor, which would begin the slow erosion of the feudal system. There is much more to tell about the plagues, but hopefully this has given you a good primer into the history of the Black Death. Please subscribe if you want more church history stories. Cheers.